Ethan Crawford walked into the dimly lit hotel hallway, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. He had stayed in countless luxury hotels over the years, each one blending into the next, a meaningless blur of cold elegance and sterile perfection. Yet, as he moved toward his suite, a strange unease crept up his spine. Then he saw her. A woman, no older than 24, stood at the far end of the corridor, adjusting the cleaning cart beside her. She wore the standard uniform of hotel staff, a simple white blouse and dark pants, but that wasn't what caught his attention. It was her face. His breath hitched. His pulse roared in his ears. She turned slightly, revealing delicate features that were burned into his soul, the same high cheekbones, the same full lips, and the same piercing hazel eyes. Even the small scar on her left wrist, a faint crescent he remembered tracing with his fingers late at night, was exactly the same for 10 years. He had told himself Olivia was gone, that the crash had taken her, swallowed her whole, that there was nothing left of the woman he loved but memories and pain. And yet, here she was. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his body rigid. His mind screamed that this was impossible, that it had to be some cruel trick of the light. But his heart, his damn, reckless heart, pounded with a truth he couldn't ignore. "Excuse me." His voice came out hoarse, unsteady. The woman turned at the sound, meeting his gaze with a polite, neutral expression. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" Her voice was softer, younger, and yet, there was something achingly familiar about it. "What's your name?" he demanded, barely managing to keep his tone in check. She blinked, taken aback by his intensity. "Valerie Mitchell." Valerie, not Olivia. His stomach twisted. It had to be a coincidence. A bizarre, impossible coincidence. But Ethan Crawford didn't believe in coincidences. "Are you sure?" His words came out sharper than intended, her brows knitted together in confusion. Yes." She hesitated, gripping the edge of her cleaning cart. "Do I know you?" No, she couldn't. But damn it, she should. He forced a tight smile, retreating a step before his emotions gave him away. "No, you just remind me of someone." Valerie nodded, though she still looked wary. "Happens all the time." Ethan didn't respond. He turned away, his mind spinning in 1,000 directions. He needed answers. Back in his suite, Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the whiskey glass in his hand. But not drinking. His phone sat beside him, screen dark. But his thoughts burned with only one decision: hiring a private investigator. It was an extreme move, irrational even. But something in his gut told him this was no simple resemblance. Olivia's face wasn't one you just stumbled upon by accident. He picked up his phone and dialed. The call was answered on the second ring. "Carter," a gruff voice responded. "I need you to look into someone," Ethan said, his voice steady, his resolve hardening. There was a pause. "That's new. You usually have me looking into people you want to destroy. This is different." Carter sighed. "All right, give me a name." Ethan's grip tightened on the glass. "Valerie Mitchell." Another pause. "And what exactly am I looking for?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Everything." Over the next few days, Ethan found himself drawn back to the hotel corridors, lingering near the cleaning staff's stations. Watching from a distance, he wasn't sure what he expected to find. Some proof that Valerie wasn't real. Some tiny imperfection that would break the illusion. But every time he saw her, the feeling only grew stronger. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she tilted her head slightly when she was deep in thought, the way she walked, graceful, yet with a determined purpose. He needed facts, and fast. Then, late one evening, his phone buzzed. "Got something?" Carter's voice came through the line. Ethan sat up straight. "Tell me." Carter let out a slow breath. "She grew up in an orphanage in Chicago. No known family. No adoption records. No birth certificate." Ethan frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "That's not the weird part," Carter continued. "Every attempt to trace her past beyond the orphanage, dead end. It's like someone erased her existence before she was even 5 years old." The air left Ethan's lungs. His grip on the phone tightened. No known parents. No real past. A decade-old wound reopened in his chest. His wife had been pregnant when she died. Could it be? His heart pounded so hard he could hear it. For the first time in 10 years, something inside him woke up, and it wasn't grief, it was hope. Ethan barely slept that night. His mind was trapped in an endless loop, replaying every moment of the past few days. The moment he saw Valerie, the way she looked at him, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed, the words Carter had said over the phone. No known family, no records before the orphanage. None of it made sense. By morning, he was seated in his penthouse suite, staring at his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. He wanted to call Carter back, to demand more information, but he knew better. Carter was thorough. If there was more to find, he would find it. Instead, he found himself leaving his suite, moving with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He needed to see her again. He needed to confirm with his own eyes that she was real, that she wasn't some hallucination born from grief and exhaustion. When he reached the lobby, his gaze immediately swept the area. Housekeeping carts were lined against the wall near the elevators, the staff moving about in their routine. And then, there she was. Valerie stood near the front desk, speaking to another staff member. Completely unaware of his presence, he took a deep breath and approached. She noticed him just as he was a few steps away, her expression shifting slightly. She recognized him, but there was no fear, only curiosity. "Mr. Crawford?" She greeted him, professional yet polite. "Do you need something?" He hesitated. His mind scrambled for an excuse, some reason to talk to her that didn't make him sound like a lunatic. He stopped himself. He couldn't ask about Olivia. He couldn't just come out and say that she looked like a dead woman, and he suspected she was his long-lost daughter. He needed a different approach. "I realized I was rude yesterday," he said smoothly. "I startled you, and I didn't introduce myself properly." Valerie blinked, tilting her head slightly. "That's okay." He extended a hand. "Ethan Crawford." She hesitated before shaking his hand. Her grip was warm but firm. "Valerie Mitchell." There was a small, awkward silence before she cleared her throat. "Are you enjoying your stay?" He almost laughed. The absurdity of the situation was suffocating. He had spent a decade haunted by his past, and now he was standing in front of a young woman who shouldn't exist. Exchanging pleasantries like this was any other day. "It's been interesting," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "We try our best." Ethan's gaze flickered to her wrist, where the faint scar rested against her skin. A scar Olivia had. A scar Olivia got when she cut herself as a teenager. He had been the one to press a cloth against it, to tell her it would heal but leave a mark. His stomach twisted. "You grew up in Chicago." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Valerie stiffened slightly, a flicker of something crossing her face before she nodded. "Yeah, spent most of my life there. Family still there?" She hesitated. He caught it. "I don't really have one," she said after a moment. "It was just me. Grew up in an orphanage." His chest tightened. "You don't know anything about your parents." She exhaled, shifting her weight from one foot to another. "Nope. No records, no names, nothing. People told me I was left at the orphanage when I was a baby. But that's all I know." Ethan's mind reeled. This was real. This wasn't just some strange coincidence. This wasn't his mind playing tricks on him. This was her. She didn't know it, but she was his daughter. His voice almost failed him. "You never tried looking." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Of course I did, but you can't find something that doesn't exist." Something in her words hit him like a hammer to the chest. The quiet resignation, the acceptance of a truth that had been fed to her for years. She really thought she didn't exist. Ethan clenched his fists at his sides, the fury building inside him. Someone had done this. Someone had erased her. Someone had taken her and thrown her into a life where she would never know the truth. He already knew who. Daniel. His hands itched to wrap around his brother's throat, to tear the truth out of him. Valerie glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. "I should get back to work. It was nice meeting you, Mr. Crawford." His eyes snapped back to her. He didn't want to let her go. He didn't want her to disappear back into the routine she had been forced into, completely unaware of how much she mattered. But he nodded. Likewise. She offered him a small smile before walking away. Ethan stood there, watching her disappear down the hallway, his chest burning with a mixture of rage and determination. He wouldn't lose her again. Back in his suite, he picked up his phone and dialed Carter. The investigator answered on the first ring. What? Dig deeper, Ethan ordered. I need everything. I don't care how buried it is. Find it. Carter was silent for a moment before responding. I was already ahead of you, and you're not gonna like what I found. Ethan braced himself. Tell me. There was a long pause. Then Carter spoke, his tone dark. Her records weren't just lost, they were erased. Someone went through a hell of a lot of trouble to make sure Valerie Mitchell never existed before she was 5 years old. Ethan's blood turned to ice. That's not all, Carter continued. You said Olivia was pregnant when she died, right? Ethan's throat tightened. Yes, Carter exhaled. Then you might want to sit down for this. Ethan didn't sit. Because I think Valerie isn't just some girl who looks like Olivia. Carter's voice dropped to a near whisper. I think she is Olivia's daughter. Ethan closed his eyes. The ground beneath him felt unsteady, as if the entire world had tilted. He had spent 10 years believing he had lost everything. Now, he knew he had something to fight for, and God help whoever had tried to take her from him. Ethan paced his suite, his mind racing with Carter's words. Her records weren't just lost, they were erased. The weight of that truth pressed down on him like a vice. Someone, Daniel, had made sure Valerie never knew who she was. Someone had stolen her identity, her history, and buried it so deep she would never find it. But now, he would. He clenched his fists, breathing deeply, trying to steady himself. For 10 years he had lived in the shadow of grief, convinced there was nothing left to fight for. Now, he had something. Someone, his daughter, and he wasn't going to let this go. He grabbed his phone again. Carter, I don't care what it takes. I need solid proof. Find me anything that connects Valerie to Olivia. Anything that ties her to my daughter. Carter sighed on the other end. I'm already on it, but whoever did this. They were damn good. No paper trail, no hospital records, no birth certificate. If you're hoping for a document that says, Valerie Mitchell, daughter of Olivia Crawford, you're out of luck. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had expected that. Daniel would never have left something so obvious behind. But there had to be something. A mistake, a missed detail, a thread he could pull until the whole damn lie unraveled. What about the orphanage? Ethan pressed. There was a pause. That's where things get weird, Carter admitted. She was left there when she was about 5, but no one knows by who. No names, no faces, just poof. One day she was there. Ethan's grip on his phone tightened. No one just appears, Carter. Someone put her there. I know, Carter said, his tone dark. And I'm gonna find out who. Ethan ended the call and sank into the chair near the window, staring out at the skyline of New York. His pulse pounded with frustration. He needed more, needed answers, and he needed to talk to Valerie again. The next morning, he found himself back in the lobby, scanning the area for any sign of her. He spotted her near the elevators, pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. She looked different in the daylight, less like Olivia, more like her own person, but the resemblance still clawed at him, still made his breath hitch in his throat. He approached, and this time, she saw him coming. Mr. Crawford, she greeted, her voice careful. Is everything all right? No, everything was not all right. Nothing had been all right for a decade, but he forced a polite smile. I was hoping to talk to you. She hesitated, glancing down the hall. I'm kind of working. This won't take long. Valerie sighed, setting her rag down on the cart. Okay, what's up? Ethan studied her, choosing his words carefully. He couldn't overwhelm her, couldn't let his emotions take over. He needed her to trust him. I want to help you, he said simply. Her brows furrowed. Help me with what? Finding out who you really are. Her expression turned guarded, her posture stiffening. I already told you, there's nothing to find. I tried for years. No records, no family. It's just how it is. But what if it wasn't? She blinked. What do you mean? What if someone made sure you wouldn't find anything? She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You think someone erased my past? Why the hell would anyone do that? Because you were stolen from me. Ethan exhaled, softening his tone. I don't know yet, but I have people looking into it. Her expression shifted from disbelief to something closer to suspicion. Why do you even care? Because you're my daughter. Because I know what it's like to lose someone, he said instead. And I don't think you should have to live not knowing where you came from. She searched his face, uncertainty flickering in her hazel eyes. Then she shook her head. I don't need charity, Mr. Crawford. It's not charity. She crossed her arms. Then what is it? Ethan hesitated. He was walking a dangerous line. If he pushed too hard, she'd shut down completely. But if he didn't push at all, he'd never get through to her. Finally, he settled on the truth, at least part of it. You remind me of someone, he admitted. Someone I lost a long time ago. Valerie's expression softened, just slightly. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Just let me help, Valerie. No strings attached. If I find something, I'll tell you. If I don't, then you'll know you were right all along. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip. Then, finally, okay. A breath of relief rushed out of him. Okay. She looked down at her hands before meeting his gaze again. But don't get your hopes up. Ethan's jaw tightened. He already had, that night. His phone rang again. Carter's voice was sharp. I found something. Ethan's heart pounded. What is it? The orphanage, Carter said. Turns out, a donation was made 10 years ago, right before Valerie showed up there. Ethan frowned. And the donor was Daniel Crawford. The air in the room went still. Ethan's grip on his phone turned white-knuckled. His pulse thundered in his ears. Daniel, his brother, had left a paper trail, and Ethan was going to use it to burn his entire world to the ground. Ethan sat in his hotel suite, gripping the edge of the desk as Carter's words echoed in his mind. A donation was made 10 years ago, right before Valerie showed up there. The donor was Daniel Crawford. The confirmation sent a surge of adrenaline through his veins. He had known, deep down, that Daniel was behind this, but now he had proof that his brother had been involved in Valerie's disappearance, proof that Daniel had tried to erase his own niece from existence. He pressed his fingers against his temples, forcing himself to think clearly. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about getting Valerie back, about showing her the truth before Daniel could twist it any further. But he had to be careful. If Daniel caught wind of what he was doing, he'd bury the truth even deeper. Ethan took a deep breath. Tell me everything. Carter sighed through the phone. The donation was significant, Ethan. We're talking about a 6-figure amount wired directly to the orphanage. No explanation. No personal visit. Just a transaction that happened to coincide with a little girl mysteriously appearing at their doorstep. Ethan clenched his jaw. Did he use his name? Carter scoffed. Of course not. It went through a shell company, but I traced it back. It all leads to him. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. What else? There's one more thing. A former worker at the orphanage. An old woman named Linda Hayes. She was there when Valerie arrived. I tracked her down. She's retired now, but she remembers that night. Ethan sat up straighter. Where is she? Chicago. I'll be on the next flight. Carter sighed. Ethan, I know you want answers, but take it slow. You don't know how deep this goes. Ethan's grip on his phone tightened. I know exactly how deep it goes. The line went dead. The next morning, Ethan stood outside a modest home in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. The house was small but well kept, with a neat garden lining the front yard. He knocked twice. A few moments later, the door creaked open. An elderly woman with sharp blue eyes and graying hair peered at him from behind the screen door. Can I help you? Ms. Hayes, Ethan asked. Her gaze flickered with recognition. You're the man Carter called about. He nodded. I need to ask you about Valerie Mitchell. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind her. I don't like talking about that night, she murmured. But something tells me you already know more than you should. Ethan met her gaze. I need the truth. Linda sighed, rubbing her hands together. It was late, stormy, the kind of night that makes people restless. I was doing my rounds when I heard a noise at the front entrance. Thought it was the wind. But then I heard it again. A soft cry. Ethan's throat tightened. I opened the doors and saw her. Linda continued. She was standing there, soaked to the bone, barely 5 years old, just standing, not moving, not running away, like someone told her to stay put. Ethan's chest ached. He could picture it. His daughter. Alone, abandoned in the dark. I called out to her, but she didn't answer. Just stared at me. The only thing she had was a stuffed rabbit and a small backpack with nothing inside. No note, no identification. Just a scared little girl with no past. Ethan swallowed hard. Did she say anything? Linda hesitated. Just one thing, over and over again. Ethan's pulse pounded. What did she say? Linda met his eyes, her voice barely a whisper. She kept saying, "Mommy told me to wait." A sharp, icy sensation stabbed through Ethan's chest. Olivia. She had been alive. She had been there. And she had tried to keep their daughter safe. Ethan's hands curled into fists. His mind raced. If Olivia had been there that night, if she had managed to save Valerie before disappearing, then what the hell had happened to her? Linda sighed, shaking her head. I tried asking her who her mother was, where she came from, but she didn't remember. Or maybe she just blocked it out. Ethan nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. And Daniel, did he ever come around? Linda frowned. No, but about a month later, the orphanage got a sudden influx of donations. No name attached, no explanation. Just money. Ethan exhaled sharply. Daniel hadn't just stolen his daughter. He had made sure she would never remember where she came from. He pushed a hand through his hair, forcing himself to stay calm. Did Valerie ever talk about anything else? Anything that might help? Linda hesitated. There was one thing, a nightmare she used to have. Ethan's gaze snapped back to her. She would wake up screaming about a car, Linda said softly. A car on fire, someone yelling her name. Every time. She'd cry until she fell back asleep. Ethan's stomach twisted. She had been there. She had seen it. The night Olivia had died, or supposedly died. Valerie had witnessed it. A slow, burning rage built inside him. Daniel had done this. He had orchestrated the worst pain of Ethan's life. Had stolen his wife, his daughter, and rewritten history. But now, Ethan had a thread, a memory, a piece of the puzzle that Daniel had tried to bury, and he was going to pull until the whole damn thing unraveled. Linda touched his arm gently. I don't know who you are to her, Mr. Crawford, but if you're here after all this time, it must mean something. Ethan met her gaze, his voice firm. She's my daughter. Linda's eyes widened, but she said nothing, just nodded slowly. Ethan stood. Thank you. She hesitated. What are you going to do? He turned, his jaw tight. Find out if her mother is still alive. And if she was, he was going to bring Olivia home. Ethan boarded the earliest flight back to New York, his mind racing with everything Linda had told him. Valerie had been there the night of the accident. Olivia had been alive long enough to tell their daughter to wait. And Daniel, his brother, his own flesh and blood, had ensured she never remembered. He gritted his teeth, gripping the armrests as the plane began its descent. He had spent 10 years drowning in grief, believing his world had been shattered beyond repair. But now the pieces were coming together. Olivia might still be out there. And if she was, he was going to find her by the time he arrived at his hotel. The sky had turned a deep shade of gray. The storm brewing outside felt fitting. His entire life had turned into a whirlwind of buried secrets and stolen truths. He barely made it to his suite before pulling out his phone and dialing Carter. The investigator picked up after a single ring. Tell me you have something. I have more than something, Carter said, his voice laced with urgency. I pulled every hospital record within a 50-mile radius of where Olivia's accident happened. Every morgue report, every police file. You know what I found. Ethan held his breath. Nothing, Carter continued. No body, no official confirmation of death, just a report saying her vehicle was found burned beyond recognition. Ethan's pulse pounded. You're telling me they never found remains? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Carter confirmed. Whoever staged that crash wanted you to believe she was dead, but they never actually produced a body. Ethan ran a hand over his face, trying to steady himself. So where the hell did she go? Carter exhaled. That's the question, isn't it? Ethan paced the room, his mind spinning. Daniel had to be involved. He made sure Valerie disappeared. What if he did the same to Olivia? That's what I'm thinking, Carter admitted. I checked into Daniel's financials from that time. There was a withdrawal from one of his private accounts right after the accident. A big one. Ethan stopped pacing. How big? Enough to pay someone to make a person disappear. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. Do you have a name? Not yet, Carter admitted. But I have a lead. Ethan inhaled sharply. Where? There's a man. Used to be a private contractor. Real ghost type. Did work for people who wanted things off the record. His name's Marcus Tate. Ethan's jaw clenched. Where is he? Last known location, Texas. Ethan froze. Texas. The same place where Olivia's trail had gone cold. He exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. Find him, Carter scoffed. Already on it. Ethan ended the call and dropped onto the couch. Pressing his fingers against his temples, he had spent the past decade believing Olivia had been taken from him in the cruelest way imaginable. Now, he was beginning to suspect she had been stolen, and if she was still out there, a soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He hesitated before standing, crossing the room in long strides. When he opened the door, he wasn't sure who he expected to see, but it wasn't Valerie. She stood in the hallway, shifting her weight awkwardly. She was out of uniform, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Hey, she said hesitantly. Ethan blinked, taken aback. Valerie, she swallowed, glancing down the hall before looking back at him. Can I come in? He stepped aside without a word, letting her in. She moved to the center of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He shut the door and turned to face her. What's wrong? She hesitated before exhaling heavily. I don't know why I'm here, she admitted. Something about what you said, about me not existing before I was 5. Ethan remained silent, letting her find her words. I went back to my apartment, she continued, and I started thinking about it, about how I never really questioned it before. The fact that I had no baby pictures, no stories about where I came from, I just accepted it. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes searching. But now I can't stop thinking about it. Ethan's chest tightened. She was on the edge of the truth. A part of her already knew. She just didn't have the words for it yet. I don't know what you're hoping to find, she admitted. But if there's even a chance you're right, I need to know. Ethan nodded. Then let's find out together. She hesitated before nodding. A beat of silence stretched between them before she cleared her throat. One more thing. He lifted a brow. Yeah? She hesitated, her expression uncertain. You said I reminded you of someone. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Who? She asked softly. He exhaled slowly. My wife. Valerie blinked, surprised. Oh, she died 10 years ago, he continued, in a car accident. Something flickered in her eyes. A car on fire, she whispered. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Valerie frowned, rubbing her temple. I don't know why I said that. Ethan's pulse pounded. Valerie, she took a shaky breath. I keep having this dream. A car, flames, someone calling my name. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. Do you see anything else? She shook her head. Just fear, panic, and then nothing. Ethan inhaled sharply. It wasn't just a dream. It was a memory, and it meant she had been there that night. He stepped closer, his voice steady. What if I told you that wasn't just a dream? She stiffened. What do you mean? Ethan met her gaze. What if I told you that was real? She stared at him, her expression unreadable. And then, in the quiet of the hotel suite, she whispered the words that would change everything. I think I already knew. Ethan felt his breath hitch. She didn't know why, didn't know how, but deep down, she had always felt it, like a puzzle missing a piece she had stopped trying to find. Now, that missing piece was falling into place, and Ethan was going to make sure she found the rest. Ethan watched as Valerie sat on the couch, her fingers gripping the fabric of her hoodie like it was the only thing grounding her. She had just admitted something neither of them could ignore. Deep down, she had always felt like something was missing, and now, the cracks in the story she had accepted her whole life were beginning to widen. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her dark hair. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why I keep seeing these things in my head. Ethan sat across from her, his gaze steady. Because they're not just dreams, Valerie. She swallowed hard. Then what are they? Memories, he said simply. Her expression tightened. That doesn't make sense. How could I remember something that never happened? Ethan hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything. wanted to say the words, "You're my daughter," and finally piece together the truth for her. But she was already on edge. If he overwhelmed her now, she'd pull away. He leaned forward, keeping his tone calm. What if it did happen? What if you were there that night? She stared at him, searching his face for some sign of deception. Are you saying, I saw that accident? He nodded. I think so. Valerie pressed her fingers to her temples, squeezing her eyes shut. No, that's crazy. I was just a kid. I don't remember anything before the orphanage. Ethan exhaled slowly. Because someone didn't want you to. She went completely still when she finally looked at him again. Her voice was barely a whisper. What are you saying? Ethan clenched his fists. What if you weren't just some abandoned child? What if someone made sure you never knew who you were? Valerie swallowed hard. That's insane. Is it? He leaned back, studying her carefully. You told me yourself. No birth records, no history, nothing before the orphanage. You think that's normal? She didn't answer. Ethan continued. You said in your dream, someone calls your name. Who do you think it was? She hesitated, opening her mouth like she wanted to say something, then stopped. Frustration flashed across her face. I don't know, but Ethan knew. He took a slow breath, his heart pounding. I think it was your mother. Valerie flinched at the word. My mother. Yes. He paused before saying her name. Olivia. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The name didn't register any recognition in her eyes, but something in her posture shifted, like her body knew something her mind didn't. Ethan pushed forward. She was in that car, and I think she was trying to protect you. Valerie shook her head. That can't be right. I would remember something like that. Would you? He held her gaze. Or would someone make sure you forgot? She sucked in a sharp breath. Ethan watched as doubt and fear played across her features. He could see the war happening inside her. She wanted to dismiss it, to say it was impossible. But a part of her, maybe the part that had always felt lost, was listening. She exhaled, her voice barely audible. If that's true, then where is she? Ethan clenched his jaw. That was the question that haunted him the most. If Olivia had survived the crash, if she'd been alive long enough to leave Valerie at the orphanage, then where the hell had she gone? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm going to find out. Valerie looked down at her hands, as if trying to process everything. Then, after a long silence, she whispered, and if she's dead? Ethan's stomach twisted. He had spent 10 years believing Olivia was gone, believing that she had died in that fire, and now, the possibility that she had survived was keeping him upright, if he allowed himself to think otherwise. To think that she had been alive only to die alone, without him, without their daughter. It would destroy him, so he refused to accept it. We don't know that, he said firmly. And until we do, I'm not giving up. Valerie met his gaze, something unreadable in her expression. She nodded slowly, like she was making a silent agreement with herself. Then, after another pause, she stood. I should go. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to stop her, to make sure she didn't shut down completely, but he could see it in her eyes. She needed space. He nodded. All right. She hesitated at the door, glancing back at him. If you find something, tell me. Ethan's throat felt tight, but he managed to say, I will. She left without another word. Ethan exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. His entire world had turned upside down in a matter of days, and he wasn't done yet. His phone buzzed. He picked it up without checking the caller ID. Yeah. Carter's voice came through the line. Urgent. You need to get to Texas. Ethan tensed. Why? I found Marcus Tate. Ethan straightened. And he knows something about Olivia. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. Carter continued. But you better hurry. Word is, someone else is looking for him too. Ethan didn't need to ask who. He already knew. Daniel, his brother, was still one step ahead, but not for long, without hesitation. Ethan grabbed his jacket and booked the first flight to Texas. He was done waiting for answers. It was time to get them himself. Ethan sat in the back of the car, his fingers tapping restlessly against his knee as the plane descended into Texas. He hadn't been here in years, not since the days when business deals and corporate expansions had been his priority. Now, the only thing that mattered was the truth. Carter was waiting for him just outside the small airport, leaning against a black SUV, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but Ethan could see the tension in his stance. As soon as he stepped out of the car, Carter straightened. "I hope you're ready for this," Carter muttered as Ethan approached. "Just tell me where he is," Ethan said, his voice tight. Carter exhaled sharply, motioning toward the SUV. "Get in. I'll explain on the way." Ethan didn't waste time with questions. He climbed into the passenger seat, and Carter pulled onto the main road, the engine rumbling beneath them. "Tate's a ghost," Carter started. "Used to be one of those guys people paid to make problems disappear. No paper trail, no records. If he was involved in something, you wouldn't find a damn thing linking him to it." Ethan clenched his jaw. "And you're sure he was involved?" Carter shot him a look. "I don't deal in guesses, Crawford. I deal in facts. And the fact is, Tate was in the area when Olivia's accident happened. Then, a few weeks later, he disappears for a while, only to resurface in Texas under a new identity." Ethan's grip on the dashboard tightened. "Where is he now?" Carter hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. Word is, Daniel's men are looking for him too." A cold rage spread through Ethan's chest. Of course Daniel was trying to cover his tracks. He had stolen Ethan's daughter, taken his wife, and now he was scrambling to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. Carter continued. "Tate's holed up in a cabin about an hour outside of town. I don't know if he'll talk, but I know one thing. If Daniel gets to him first, we'll never get answers." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Then we better get there first." Carter pressed harder on the gas, the SUV speeding down the open road. The drive was tense, neither man speaking as the city faded into the vast emptiness of the Texas countryside. The land stretched for miles, dusty roads, scattered trees, and the occasional rundown gas station. Ethan barely noticed any of it. His focus was on what lay ahead, as they turned onto a narrow dirt road. Carter slowed the SUV, eyes scanning the landscape. "That's it up ahead," he said, nodding toward a small, weathered cabin tucked between the trees. "No sign of Daniel's guys yet, but we're running on borrowed time." Ethan was already moving before Carter could finish. He stepped out of the car, his strides purposeful as he made his way to the front door. He knocked once. Firm, demanding. Silence. He knocked again. Still nothing. Carter stepped up beside him. "We don't have time for this." Ethan didn't either. Without hesitation, he tried the door handle. It was locked. Carter let out a breath. "I guess we're doing this the hard way." A swift kick from Ethan sent the door crashing open. Dust filled the air as the door slammed against the wall. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of cigarettes and old wood. A table sat in the center of the room, cluttered with papers, an empty whiskey bottle, and a loaded gun. And standing in the corner, a man, Marcus Tate. His hair was graying, his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He didn't look surprised to see them. If anything, he looked like he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Crawford," Tate muttered, his voice rough. "Figured you'd come knocking eventually." Ethan took a step closer, his jaw tight. "Where is she?" Tate exhaled, rubbing his face. "Straight to the point, huh? I respect that." He nodded toward Carter. "You didn't tell him?" Carter crossed his arms. "I figured it was better coming from you." Ethan's patience was razor thin. "Tell me what?" Tate met his gaze. "Your wife was alive when I found her." The room spun. Ethan's hands curled into fists. "What did you do to her?" Tate held up a hand. "Nothing. That wasn't my job." "Then what the hell was your job?" Ethan's voice was dangerously low. Tate hesitated before answering. "To take her somewhere she'd never be found." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who hired you?" Tate sighed. "Your brother." Rage exploded inside him. His muscles tensed, his breathing sharp. He had known deep down, but hearing it confirmed sent white-hot fury through his veins. Daniel hadn't just stolen his daughter. He had taken Olivia. He had planned this. Ethan's voice was deadly calm. "Where did you take her?" Tate exhaled. "A place off the grid. A town in Texas. Small, quiet. She had no memory when I dropped her off, and I was paid to make sure it stayed that way." Ethan's world tilted. Olivia had been alive. She had been alive this whole time. living in some town under a different identity, never knowing who she really was. He stepped forward, his entire body coiled with restrained violence. "Give me the name of the town." Tate hesitated. "Look, Crawford, I get why you're angry, but you don't understand." Ethan grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "The name," Tate coughed, eyes flickering to Carter. "You gonna let him kill me?" Carter shrugged. "I don't see a problem yet." Ethan's grip tightened. "Last chance." Tate let out a shaky breath. "Fairview." Ethan released him abruptly, stepping back as his mind raced. Fairview. That was where she was. Carter pulled out his phone. "I'll find the exact location." Ethan was already moving toward the door. His pulse roared in his ears. Olivia was alive. She was close, and after 10 years of living in the dark, he was finally going to bring her home. But as he reached the doorway, something caught his eye. Movement outside. Carter saw it too. "We've got company." Ethan turned to Tate. "Did you tell Daniel we were coming?" Tate scoffed. "Give me some credit. I'm not an idiot." Ethan didn't have time to argue. He looked out the window and saw the unmistakable shape of black SUVs approaching fast. "Daniel's men," Carter cursed. "Looks like your brother just got the memo." Ethan clenched his jaw. They had what they came for now. They just had to get out alive. Ethan's pulse pounded as he watched the SUVs barrel down the dirt road, kicking up a thick cloud of dust behind them. They had minutes, maybe less, before Daniel's men reached the cabin. Carter moved fast, already pulling a gun from his jacket. "We need to go, now." Ethan turned to Marcus Tate, his jaw tight. "You coming with us, or are you staying here to die?" Tate let out a sharp breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his coat. "I didn't sign up for this." "Yeah, well, neither did I." Ethan shot back before shoving open the door. The air outside was thick and dry, the heat settling over them like a suffocating blanket. The SUVs were closing in, their engines roaring. Carter pointed toward the side of the cabin. "Back way, we can cut through the trees, circle to the car." They moved fast, boots crunching against the dirt as they ducked behind the small cabin. Ethan could feel the adrenaline burning through his veins, but his focus was razor sharp. They reached the tree line just as the SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the cabin. Doors swung open, and men poured out. 5, maybe 6 of them, all armed. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had no doubt they were here to clean up Daniel's mess. "We don't have time to play hide and seek," Carter muttered. Glancing at Ethan, "You get in that car, and you drive straight to Fairview. I'll keep them busy." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not leaving you behind." "You're wasting time," Carter growled. "This isn't about me. This is about your wife." Ethan hesitated, his entire body tense. Every instinct told him to stay and fight. But Carter was right. Olivia was waiting, and every second wasted here was another second Daniel had to get ahead of them. Tate shifted beside them, his voice low. "There's another road a mile down. If we cut through the trees, we can get to your car without them seeing us." Ethan exhaled sharply before nodding. "Fine, let's move." Carter gave him one last look. "Find her." Ethan didn't respond. He just turned and ran. The trees were dense, branches clawing at his arms as he pushed forward. Tate kept pace beside him, his breathing heavy but steady. They moved fast, weaving through the landscape as the shouts of Daniel's men echoed in the distance. By the time they reached the car, Ethan's muscles were burning. He threw open the driver's side door and started the engine, the tires kicking up gravel as he sped onto the road. Tate exhaled roughly in the passenger seat. That was close. Ethan barely heard him. His mind was already racing ahead. To the next step, to Fairview. To Olivia. The drive was tense, the silence thick with unspoken thoughts. Ethan gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Tate finally broke the silence. "I need to tell you something before we get there." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Now's not the time for games." "It's not a game," Tate muttered. "It's about her." Ethan shot him a glare. "What about her?" Tate hesitated, then exhaled. "She doesn't know who she is." Ethan stilled. Tate continued. "Whatever happened that night, whatever your brother did, she lost everything. Her memory, her past. When I dropped her off in Fairview, she was just blank." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a sharp pain through his chest. She made a life there. Tate added quietly. She's not Olivia Crawford anymore. She's someone else. Ethan exhaled slowly, his grip on the wheel tightening. Then I'll remind her. Fairview was small, just as Tate had said. A quiet town tucked away from the rest of the world. The kind of place where people lived their whole lives without ever leaving. It was almost too perfect, too untouched. The kind of place someone would go if they wanted to disappear. Ethan pulled the car to a stop near the town center, his heart hammering. Tate pointed toward a small school building across the street. She's a teacher, goes by the name Anna Walker. Ethan's breath caught. Anna. It was wrong. It didn't fit. But if she had no memory of Olivia, no memory of him or Valerie, then it made sense. His chest felt tight as he stepped out of the car. The school looked quiet, the sun casting long shadows over the pavement. Children were filing out of the building, their laughter filling the air. And then he saw her. She was standing near the entrance, speaking to a young girl with blonde braids. Her hair was longer than he remembered, falling past her shoulders in soft waves. She wore a simple dress, nothing like the elegant clothes Olivia used to wear. But it was her. It was Olivia. His breath caught, his body frozen as he watched her smile. Soft, warm, alive. The world blurred around him. It had been 10 years. 10 years of grief, of believing she was gone. And yet, here she was, in the flesh, just a few feet away from him. His throat tightened. He wanted to call out to her, to run to her, to pull her into his arms and never let go. But then, she turned, and the moment their eyes met, his heart shattered all over again, because there was no recognition in her gaze, no flicker of familiarity. She didn't know him, didn't know the man who had loved her more than life itself, didn't know the husband who had spent every day of the last decade mourning her. She blinked at him, polite but distant, before giving him a small nod and turning back to the little girl. Ethan felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath him. Tate's words echoed in his head. She's not Olivia Crawford anymore. She's someone else. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to take a slow breath. It didn't matter. She was here. She was alive. And even if she didn't remember him, didn't remember the life they had, he wasn't going to walk away. He had lost her once. He wasn't going to lose her again. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sounds of the small town around him. Olivia, Anna, was right there, alive, breathing, moving through the world as if the past 10 years had never happened. But she didn't recognize him. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, dreamed of what he would say, how it would feel to see her again. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could have beside him. Marcus Tate exhaled quietly. Told you, he muttered. Ethan barely heard him. His entire focus was locked on Olivia. She was kneeling beside the little girl, smiling gently as she tucked a stray curl behind the child's ear. The warmth in her expression, the kindness, it was all still there. The same Olivia he had loved, the same woman who had once been his whole world. She just didn't remember. He forced himself to move, his legs heavy as he stepped forward. He wasn't thinking about what he would say, wasn't thinking about anything, except the fact that after a decade of believing she was gone, she was right here. The little girl gave Olivia a quick hug before running off to join a group of friends. Olivia, Anna, stood, brushing off her dress, and turned back toward the school. Ethan took another step. Olivia, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She stopped mid-step. Slowly, she turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Excuse me. Her tone was polite but cautious. Ethan swallowed hard. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Every detail was the same. The shape of her lips, the way her brows arched slightly when she was curious, the small scar near her collarbone that she had gotten when she was 19. This was her. And yet, there was a wall between them. I'm sorry, she continued when he didn't immediately respond. Do I know you? The words cut deeper than he expected. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to keep steady. I thought you looked familiar. She studied him for a moment, tilting her head slightly, as if trying to place him. You're not from around here, are you? No. His voice was rough, barely controlled. I just got into town. Her gaze lingered on him, something flickering behind her eyes, but it was gone before he could grasp it. "Well," she said finally, offering a small smile. "Welcome to Fairview." He almost laughed. If she knew who he was, what they had been to each other, she would know how cruelly ironic those words were. She glanced at her watch. "I should get going. It was nice meeting you, Mr." He hesitated for only a second. "Ethan." Something flickered in her expression again, so quick he almost missed it. She nodded. "Nice to meet you, Ethan." And then she turned and walked away. Ethan stood there, watching as she disappeared through the doors of the school. His chest felt tight, his entire body rigid with the effort of holding himself together. Tate let out a low whistle beside him. "That went well." Ethan's fists clenched. "She doesn't remember. I told you that before we got here." Tate shoved his hands in his pockets. "But I also told you she built a life here. A life without you." Ethan inhaled sharply, trying to ignore the sting of those words. He turned to Tate. "Who else knows she's here?" Tate shrugged. "As far as I know, just me. But if Daniel's looking, it's only a matter of time before he figures it out." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then I don't have time to waste." He wasn't leaving Fairview without her. Later that evening, Ethan found himself parked outside a small, modest house at the edge of town. It was quaint, nothing like the grand estates and high-rise penthouses Olivia had once known. A small front porch, warm light spilling from the windows, a single rocking chair swaying gently in the breeze. This was her home now. He exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel. He had spent 10 years believing she was dead. Now he was about to knock on her door. His hands felt unsteady as he stepped out of the car, his heart beat loud in his ears. He climbed the porch steps and knocked. Seconds passed. Then the door creaked open. Olivia, Anna, stood there in a simple sweater and jeans, her bare feet peeking out from under the fabric. Her expression was a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Ethan." The fact that she remembered his name sent a jolt through him. He nodded, his throat suddenly dry. She hesitated, glancing past him as if checking to see if he was alone. Then, after a beat, she sighed and stepped aside. "You should come in." He did, stepping into the warmth of the house. It was cozy, filled with soft colors and the faint scent of lavender, the kind of home she had always dreamed of. Simple, quiet. She crossed her arms, watching him carefully. "Why do I get the feeling this isn't just a coincidence?" Ethan exhaled slowly. He could lie. He could ease into it, pretend he was just passing through, but he was done with lies. "I came here looking for you," he admitted, her brow furrowed. "Why? Because I love you. Because I lost you. Because you're my wife." But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Instead, he met her gaze and said, "Because I think you deserve to know the truth." She stiffened slightly. "The truth about what?" He took a slow step closer, lowering his voice. "About who you really are." Silence stretched between them. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sweater. "I know who I am." "No," Ethan said gently. "You don't." Something in her expression cracked, just for a second, before she quickly masked it. "I think you should leave." Ethan's chest ached. She was scared. He could see it in the way she held herself, the way her eyes darted toward the door like she was preparing to shut him out. But he wasn't going anywhere. "I lost you once," he said, his voice raw. "I'm not losing you again." Her breath hitched, and for the first time since he had found her, she looked at him not with polite distance, but with something deeper, something real. It wasn't recognition, not yet, but it was something, and it was enough. For now. Ethan didn't move, neither did Olivia. They stood in the middle of her small living room, an invisible wall between them. The air was thick with tension, unspoken words hovering just beneath the surface. She was staring at him, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something together. He knew that look, knew it because he had seen it before, years ago, when she was unsure of something but too stubborn to admit it. He took a slow breath. "I know this is overwhelming." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she shook her head. "You don't understand. My life here, it's simple, it's peaceful, and She stopped, biting her lip, her hands tightening around her sweater. Ethan watched every small movement, searching for something, anything that told him she remembered. But there was nothing. No flicker of recognition. No shift in her expression that suggested his name meant more than just a stranger standing in her house. But then, why had she let him in? He took a careful step forward. I know you don't remember me, and I know you probably don't want to, but I can't walk away from this. Olivia. She flinched at the name. Her fingers twitched and she inhaled sharply, shaking her head again. My name is Anna. No, Ethan said, his voice firm but gentle. It's not. She looked away, her shoulders tense. I don't know who you think I am, but I have a life here, a job, friends. I don't need... She stopped herself, exhaling sharply. I don't need someone digging into things that don't matter anymore. Ethan clenched his jaw. They matter to me. Silence stretched between them. She was trembling, just slightly, but enough for him to notice. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, to remind her of everything they had been. But she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, he softened his tone. Let me ask you something. She exhaled shakily, eyes flickering to his. What? Have you ever felt like something was missing? Her breath hitched. She blinked, startled, before quickly masking her reaction. That's a ridiculous question. He tilted his head. Is it? She swallowed. Everyone has moments where they feel lost. That doesn't mean anything. Ethan studied her. Then why are you shaking? Her lips parted, but no words came out. She turned away abruptly, moving toward the small table near the window, pressing her palms against it as if grounding herself. I don't know what you expect from me, she whispered. Ethan took another step forward, careful not to push too hard. I don't expect anything. She closed her eyes. Then why are you here? Because I found you, he said, voice raw. And because I love you. Her entire body stiffened. Slowly, she turned back to him, her expression unreadable. You, she swallowed hard. You loved Olivia. Ethan's heart ached. You are Olivia. She shook her head, stepping back like she needed more space between them. No, I'm not. I don't remember you. I don't remember anything you're talking about. And I don't want to. Ethan felt the sting of those words. But he didn't back down. You're scared, he said quietly. She laughed, but it was hollow, forced. Scared of what? The truth. Her jaw tightened. The truth is that I have been happy here for years, and now you're showing up expecting me to... What? To suddenly remember a life that doesn't exist? Ethan inhaled sharply. It does exist, you just don't remember it yet. She turned away again, running a hand through her hair. I think you should go. Ethan's chest tightened. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing her say it still hit like a punch to the gut. He forced himself to nod. All right. She looked at him, surprised that he wasn't fighting her on it. He moved toward the door but stopped before opening it. But I'm not giving up on you, Olivia. Not now. Not ever. Her breath hitched, and for a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something hesitant, something broken. But she said nothing. Ethan walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of the room, staring after him. The night air was cool against his skin as he made his way back to the car. Tate was waiting, leaning against the side of the vehicle, watching him with unreadable eyes. How'd it go? Tate asked. Ethan exhaled sharply. Ethan exhaled. She told me to leave. Tate nodded slowly. But you're not gonna... Ethan's jaw clenched. No, I'm not. Tate smirked. Didn't think so. Ethan stared back at the house, his mind racing. Olivia was in there, locked inside a reality that had been forced on her, and somewhere, buried deep beneath the surface, was the truth. He just had to find a way to bring it back. Tate pushed off the car, nodding toward the road. We should get moving. Daniel's probably already looking for you. Ethan's entire body tensed at the thought. If Daniel figured out that he had found Olivia, there was no telling what he would do. He turned to Tate. Then we make sure he never finds her. Tate raised a brow. You planning to hide her from your own brother? Ethan's expression darkened. No. He looked back at the house, his voice firm. I'm planning to take her back. Ethan couldn't sleep, even after returning to the small motel on the outskirts of Fairview. His mind refused to slow down. Olivia was here, breathing, living, walking through a world that had been constructed for her, a life built on stolen time and buried truths. She had looked at him like he was a stranger. That was what hurt the most. He could handle anger. He could handle resistance. But the absence of recognition, that gutted him. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor. He needed a plan, needed to figure out how to make her remember, because one thing was certain: he wasn't leaving without her. A knock at the door made him look up sharply. Carter was out tracking Daniel's movements, and Tate was supposed to be laying low. Ethan reached for the gun he kept in the drawer, just in case. Before moving to open the door, he wasn't expecting to see her. Olivia, Anna, stood in the dim glow of the porch light, her expression guarded. She wore a hoodie over her dress, arms crossed tightly, like she was trying to hold herself together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she exhaled. "I shouldn't be here." Ethan swallowed hard, his grip on the door tightening. "Then why are you?" She hesitated, glancing down the hallway as if someone might be watching. Then, after another pause, she whispered, "I don't know." Ethan stepped aside, silently inviting her in. She hesitated for only a second before stepping over the threshold, her presence filling the space with an energy that nearly knocked the air from his lungs. He closed the door behind her, watching as she moved to the center of the room, arms still crossed, gaze darting around like she wasn't sure what she was doing. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stayed still, letting her find her words. "I don't know why," she continued, shaking her head. "I don't even know you. But when you said my name," she faltered, eyes flickering toward him. "Olivia." His chest tightened. "What about it?" She swallowed. It felt wrong and right at the same time. Ethan's pulse pounded. This was it. The first crack in the facade. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't remember anything before Fairview. I used to think that was normal, that maybe I just had a bad childhood, or maybe my mind just blocked things out." She rubbed her arms like she was suddenly cold. But what if that's not true? Ethan took a careful step closer. What if it's not? She let out a small, humorless laugh. "That's the problem, isn't it? If you're right, then everything I know about my life is a lie." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Then let's find out." She hesitated. "How?" He took another step. "Let me show you." She studied him, searching for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe a reason to run. But she didn't move. Ethan moved to the bedside table. Pulling open the drawer, he pulled out his wallet and retrieved a small, worn photograph. He had carried it for years, a reminder of what he had lost. He turned and handed it to her. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against his. Her breath caught the moment she looked at it. It was a picture of her, Olivia, standing beside him, laughing, eyes bright with happiness. She was wearing the blue dress he had bought her on their honeymoon. Her hand was resting on her stomach. She had been pregnant at the time. Her grip on the photo tightened. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Ethan's voice was rough. "It was taken 10 years ago." She shook her head. "No, that's not possible." He took a step closer. "It is." She was breathing harder now, something shifting in her expression. Panic, confusion, recognition. She pressed a hand to her temple. She stopped, shaking her head again. "I don't understand." Ethan's heart pounded. "You don't have to understand right now. Just trust me." She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that wasn't dismissal. But then, just as quickly, she stepped back. "I need to go." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Olivia." "No." She shook her head, her grip still tight on the photograph. "I need to think." He let out a slow breath. "All right." She hesitated one last time before turning and heading for the door. But just before she stepped out, she whispered, "I'll let you know if I remember anything." Then she was gone. Ethan sat down heavily on the bed, exhaling sharply. She was cracking. It was only a matter of time. Ethan barely slept. His mind replayed every second of his conversation with Olivia. Anna, over and over again. The way she had hesitated. The flicker of doubt in her eyes. The way her fingers had trembled as she held the photograph. She was starting to question everything. And that meant he was running out of time. Daniel wouldn't stay in the shadows forever. If his brother even suspected Ethan had found Olivia, he would make a move. And Ethan knew exactly what kind of move that would be. By morning, He was already on the phone with Carter. "Tell me you have something," Ethan muttered, pacing his motel room. Carter exhaled through the line. "Daniel's in damage control mode. I checked his financial records again. He's moving money. A lot of it. Offshore accounts, untraceable routes. It screams cover-up." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "That means he knows." "Not for sure," Carter said, "but he's paranoid. And that's dangerous." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I need to get her out of here." "Easier said than done," Carter warned. "She doesn't remember you. She doesn't trust you. You push too hard. She bolts." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He knew Carter was right. But how was he supposed to stand by and do nothing when Daniel was already making his next move? Carter sighed. "Look, I'll keep an eye on Daniel. You just focus on Olivia. Find a way to break through to her. If she remembers, if she realizes what he did, then she won't run. She'll fight." Ethan nodded to himself. That was the Olivia he knew, fierce, strong. Once she saw the truth, she wouldn't let Daniel win. "I'll call you if anything changes," Carter said before hanging up. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to calm down. He had a plan. He just had to execute it. By the afternoon, he found himself back near Olivia's house. He knew he shouldn't push too hard, but he had to see her, had to make sure she was safe. She was outside, watering the small garden in front of her porch. The sight of her, so natural, so unaware of the storm circling around her, made his chest tighten. She noticed him before he could say anything. "You again?" she said, lowering the watering can. Her expression was wary, but not unkind. Ethan forced a small smile. "Hope I'm not pushing my luck," she sighed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I still don't know what to do with you." He took a slow step forward. "I can wait." She hesitated, then motioned toward the porch. "Sit with me." Ethan followed her up the steps. Settling beside her on the wooden bench, the air was warm, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh earth. For a moment, they sat in silence. Then Olivia exhaled. I looked at the photograph again. Ethan's pulse quickened. And she traced a finger over the fabric of her jeans. It felt familiar, but I don't know if that's real or if it's just my mind playing tricks on me. He swallowed hard. "It's real." She shook her head. "How do you know?" "Because I was there," he said simply. "Because I loved you." Her breath hitched slightly, but she quickly masked it. "That's the problem, Ethan. I wasn't there. At least, not that I can remember." She exhaled sharply. "And even if I believe you, even if everything you're saying is true, what do I do with that?" Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "You come with me." She froze. "What?" He leaned forward, voice low but urgent. "Come with me. Let me show you more. Let me help you remember." Panic flickered in her eyes. I can't just leave." "Why not?" Ethan pressed. "What's keeping you here?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands tightened into fists on her lap. "This is my life." Ethan softened his tone. "No, Olivia. This is a life that was given to you. A life someone else decided you should have." She inhaled sharply. "And if I go with you, what if I don't remember? What if I don't want to remember?" Ethan's chest tightened. That was his biggest fear, that she would choose the safety of the life she knew over the truth of the one she had lost. He met her gaze. "Then I'll let you go." She blinked. "You would, if that's what you want," he said quietly. "But I don't think it is." She looked away, her expression troubled. Silence stretched between them. Then she whispered, "Give me time." Ethan's throat felt tight, but he nodded. "I can do that," she exhaled, rubbing her arms as if trying to shake off a chill. "I should go inside." Ethan stood. "I'll be around." She hesitated, then nodded before stepping inside and closing the door. Ethan let out a slow breath. She wasn't ready yet, but she wanted to be, and that was enough. For now, Ethan sat in his car, watching Olivia's house from a distance, his fingers drumming restlessly against the steering wheel. Every part of him wanted to go back inside, to push harder, to make her remember faster. But he knew that wasn't how this worked. She had asked for time. He had to give it to her, but time was exactly what they didn't have. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. "Carter, tell me you have good news," Ethan muttered as he answered. "I wish I could," Carter replied, His voice clipped. Daniel just booked a flight. He's coming to Texas. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. How long? Tomorrow. Afternoon arrival. That wasn't enough time. Ethan cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. He knows. He suspects, Carter corrected. But that's bad enough. You need to move. Ethan's jaw clenched. She's not ready. Carter exhaled. Then make her ready. Ethan ended the call without another word. He sat there for a long moment, breathing deeply, trying to calm the rage simmering beneath his skin. Daniel was coming, and when he got here, he wouldn't hesitate. If he couldn't manipulate Olivia into staying buried in this lie, he would eliminate her completely. Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. He stepped out of the car, moving toward Olivia's house. This time, he wasn't waiting for her to come to him. He needed to make her see. The knock on the door was firm, urgent. A few seconds later, it opened slightly, and Olivia peered out, startled to see him again so soon. Ethan, we need to talk, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She hesitated, but then sighed and stepped back, allowing him inside. He barely noticed the warmth of the house, the scent of lavender lingering in the air. He was focused entirely on her. She closed the door behind him, crossing her arms. You're pushing too hard. I don't have a choice, she frowned. What does that mean? Ethan exhaled sharply. Daniel is coming. Confusion flickered across her face. Who? My brother. He watched her closely, searching for any reaction. The man who made sure you forgot everything. The man who tried to erase you. Olivia shook her head. That's insane. No, Ethan said firmly. What's insane is that you don't know what he did to you, what he stole from you. She flinched slightly at his tone, but she didn't back away. I told you. I don't remember any of that. Then let me show you. She frowned. Show me what? Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small USB drive. I've been digging. Carter found something. She hesitated before slowly taking the drive from him. What is it? He swallowed. Proof. She stared at the device in her hand, her fingers tightening around it. And you think if I see whatever's on here, I'll suddenly remember? I don't know, Ethan admitted, but I think it's worth a shot. She let out a slow breath, conflicted. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. All right. She led him to a small desk in the corner of the room, where a laptop sat. Sitting down, she inserted the drive, her hands visibly trembling as she clicked on the single video file. Ethan's heart pounded as the screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, black and white, as if recorded from a hidden camera. It showed a hospital room. A woman, Olivia, was lying in a bed, looking weak, her face pale. Monitors beeped softly in the background. Then, the door opened and a man walked in. Daniel! Ethan saw Olivia stiffen beside him, but she said nothing. On the screen, Daniel leaned over the hospital bed, speaking in a low voice. The audio was faint, but it was enough. No one is coming for you, Olivia, Daniel murmured. Your husband thinks you're dead. Your daughter will never know you existed. This life, it's over. Ethan clenched his fists, rage boiling beneath his skin. He had always known Daniel was a monster, but seeing it like this, seeing him standing over Olivia, controlling her fate like a goddamn puppet master, made him want to break something on the screen. Olivia, weak but still fighting, shook her head. He'll find me. Daniel chuckled. No, he won't, because you won't remember him. Then, a doctor entered the room, holding a syringe. Ethan saw the way Olivia's breath hitched beside him. She reached up, touching the side of her head as if something inside her was shifting. On the video, Daniel leaned closer to the bed. Say goodbye to who you were. By tomorrow, you'll be someone else. The screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan turned to Olivia, watching as she sat there, completely still, staring at the dark screen. Her hands trembled. Her breathing was uneven. Then finally she whispered, It's true. Ethan's heart pounded. Olivia! She shot up from the chair, stepping back as if the walls were closing in. I saw it. That was me. Her voice was shaking. He did this to me. Ethan stood, reaching for her, but she flinched. I don't know what to do with this. Let me help you. he pleaded. "Let me get you out of here before he comes." She pressed her fingers against her temples, breathing hard. "He's coming for me." Ethan nodded. "Tomorrow." She let out a shaky breath. Then slowly she looked up at him, and for the first time since they had reunited, he saw it. Recognition. Not completely. Not fully. But it was there, flickering in her eyes like the first light of dawn breaking through darkness. And it was enough. She took a deep breath. "What do we do?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "We run." She didn't argue. She just nodded. And Ethan knew. Daniel had won for 10 years. But that ended now. Ethan moved quickly, his pulse hammering in his ears as he grabbed the bag he had packed earlier. Olivia. No. Anna was still standing by the laptop, staring at the dark screen like she was trying to pull more answers from it. He could see her hands trembling, her breathing uneven. He stepped toward her, voice low but firm. "We need to go now." She blinked, snapping out of her trance, turning to him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Go where?" "Away from here." Ethan zipped up his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. "Daniel's coming tomorrow. If we're still here when he arrives, you won't get another chance to leave." She hesitated, glancing around her small home as if she were seeing it for the first time. "This place, this life," she exhaled sharply. "It's all a lie." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, and the longer you stay here, the more dangerous it gets." Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "I should be angry. I should be furious. He took everything from me." Ethan stepped closer. "Then let's take it back." She met his gaze, something flickering in her expression. Resolve, anger, fear, a storm brewing beneath the surface. She swallowed hard. Okay, that was all he needed to hear. They moved fast. Olivia grabbed only what she could carry, a small bag with essentials, a few clothes. She hesitated at the doorway, looking back at the only life she had known for the past decade. Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. He reached for her hand. "Come on." She let out a shaky breath, then nodded, stepping out into the night. The town was quiet. Too quiet. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every distant noise like footsteps trailing behind them. Ethan kept a firm grip on Olivia's wrist as they moved toward his car, parked a block away. As they reached the vehicle, Ethan glanced around once more before opening the passenger door. "Get in." She hesitated for half a second, then climbed inside. Ethan slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel. He exhaled slowly, then turned the key. Nothing. The engine didn't even try to turn over. Ethan cursed under his breath, trying again. Still nothing. Panic prickled at the back of his neck. Someone had been here. Someone had tampered with the car. Olivia tensed beside him. "What's wrong?" He clenched his jaw. "We've been compromised." Her breath hitched. "Daniel?" "I don't know." He scanned the empty street, his instincts screaming at him. They needed to move. Now. He grabbed his phone, dialing Carter. The line rang once before Carter picked up. "Tell me you're already on the road." "We have a problem," Ethan muttered. "The car's dead." Silence, then a sharp curse. "That's not good." "No kidding." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Where are you?" "Half an hour out." "We don't have half an hour." More silence. Then Carter's voice lowered. "Then you improvise." Ethan ended the call, shoving his phone back into his pocket. He turned to Olivia. "We need another way out." She swallowed hard, glancing around. "The bus station. It's small, barely used, but there should be one leaving in 20 minutes. It wasn't ideal, but it was something." Ethan nodded. "Let's go." They slipped out of the car and moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The tension in the air was suffocating. Ethan could feel it, the weight of being hunted. They reached the bus station just as the old, rusted vehicle pulled into the lot. A few late-night travelers stood nearby. Barely paying attention, Ethan kept Olivia close as they approached the driver. 2 tickets, cash. The driver barely looked at them, nodding as he took the money. "Hurry up." Ethan ushered Olivia inside, scanning the passengers. A tired-looking mother with a toddler, an old man dozing near the window, a teenager with headphones. No one looked suspicious. They took a seat near the middle. Olivia gripped the bag in her lap, her knuckles white. Ethan exhaled, trying to shake the feeling crawling up his spine. Something wasn't right. The bus doors closed with a loud hiss. The driver shifted into gear. The vehicle lurched forward. Ethan forced himself to relax, but only slightly. Then, just as the bus pulled onto the road, Olivia gasped. Ethan followed her gaze out the window. A black SUV parked near the station, a figure standing beside it, watching them. Daniel. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Olivia's breathing hitched. He's here. Ethan grabbed her hand. It doesn't matter. We're gone. She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else. Determination. Daniel had spent a decade controlling her life, but not anymore. They were free. For now, Ethan kept his grip tight on Olivia's wrist. Feeling her pulse race beneath his fingers, he forced himself to breathe evenly, to stay calm, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to act. Daniel had found them. From the window of the moving bus, Ethan watched as the black SUV sat idle, Daniel's silhouette visible in the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. He wasn't moving, just watching. Olivia let out a shaky breath. What do we do? Ethan clenched his jaw, his mind working through every possible scenario. The bus was moving, putting distance between them, but Daniel wouldn't just let them go. He had resources. He had people. He had ways of making sure they never got far. And if there was one thing Ethan knew about his brother, it was that he never left loose ends. He turned to Olivia, keeping his voice low. We stay quiet. We stay calm. If we panic, we make mistakes. She nodded, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the fear in her eyes. She was trying to be strong, but this was too much, too fast. The bus rumbled along the dark highway, the passengers lost in their own worlds. A woman near the front was nodding off, her head tilting against the window. A teenage boy scrolled through his phone, his music barely audible through his headphones. No one was paying attention to them, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe. He leaned closer to Olivia, speaking just above a whisper. Daniel won't stop. He'll use whatever he has to track us. He probably already has people watching the bus routes. She swallowed hard. So what do we do? Ethan glanced at the road ahead. They were coming up on a gas station, a lone beacon of flickering neon in the vast emptiness of the Texas night. We get off before he expects us to, Ethan murmured. She frowned. But this bus is taking us out of town, which is exactly what he'll be expecting, Ethan countered. If we stay on, he'll just follow, but if we disappear now, we might buy ourselves some time. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Ethan stood, making his way to the front of the bus as casually as possible. The driver barely glanced at him when he spoke. We need to get off here. The man frowned. This ain't a stop. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. It is now. The driver considered it for half a second before grunting and pulling over. Olivia followed Ethan quickly, her movements stiff with nerves. As soon as they stepped onto the cracked pavement of the gas station, the bus roared back onto the highway, disappearing into the night. They were alone. Olivia exhaled, glancing around. Now what? Ethan scanned the area. The gas station was small, barely more than a convenience store with a couple of pumps. A single car was parked outside, a beat-up old pickup truck. No other signs of life. Ethan pulled her toward the side of the building, away from the main road. We wait, see if Daniel follows the bus or if he figures out what we did. She shivered slightly, rubbing her arms. And if he figures it out, Ethan met her gaze. Then we run. Minutes passed. The silence was thick, heavy. Olivia shifted on her feet, her nerves fraying with each second. Ethan could feel it too. The tension of being hunted, of knowing they were one step ahead but not far enough. Then, headlights. A sleek black SUV sped down the road, following the direction of the bus. Olivia tensed. That was him. Ethan nodded, relief and anxiety hitting him in equal measure. They had bought themselves time. But not much. He pulled out his phone, dialing Carter. We're off the bus, Ethan said the moment Carter picked up. Good, Carter responded. I tracked Daniel's people. He's got 2 teams watching exits out of Fairview. You're not going to make it far without a plan. Ethan exhaled. We need a car. Carter was silent for a beat. Then, there's a guy I know, runs a scrapyard 20 miles west. No questions asked. Cash only. Send me the location. Carter did. Ethan ended the call and turned to Olivia. "We need a ride." Her brow furrowed. "There's only one car here, and I don't think the owner is just going to hand it over." Ethan smirked. "Then we make him an offer." A few minutes later, Ethan approached the lone pickup truck where a man in his 60s was sipping a coffee, flipping through a newspaper. His gut told him this guy wasn't the type to get involved in trouble, but money talked. Ethan leaned against the truck. "Hey, buddy, I need a ride." The old man barely looked up. "Not a taxi." Ethan pulled out another $100 bill, sliding it onto the dashboard. "Not asking for a taxi." That got his attention. He eyed Ethan, then the money. "Where to?" "West, 20 miles. The man considered it, then shrugged. "Fine, get in." Ethan and Olivia climbed in, the old truck rumbling to life as they pulled onto the road. Olivia let out a shaky breath. "We did it," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't want to tell her the truth. This wasn't over, not even close. Ethan kept his eyes on the road ahead, his muscles tense as the old pickup truck rumbled westward. Olivia sat beside him, silent, staring out the window. The headlights cut through the darkness, but no matter how much distance they put between themselves and Fairview, Ethan knew it wasn't enough. Daniel was coming. He could feel it in his gut, the same way he had felt danger looming 1,000 times before. He had spent years navigating hostile boardrooms, dealing with men who thrived on power plays and deception. But Daniel wasn't just another corporate adversary. He was family, and that made him more dangerous than anyone Ethan had ever faced. The old man driving the truck hummed softly to himself, tapping his fingers on the wheel. He didn't ask questions, didn't press for details. He had taken Ethan's money, and that was enough for him. After what felt like an eternity, the truck pulled into the outskirts of a scrapyard, its gates rusted and worn from time. A single floodlight flickered above a garage, casting long shadows across the sea of discarded metal. Ethan turned to Olivia. "Stay close." She nodded, gripping her bag tightly as they stepped out. A man emerged from the garage, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. He was burly, with thick arms covered in faded tattoos, his expression one of mild curiosity. He sized up Ethan with a glance, then looked past him to Olivia. "You Carter's guy?" the man asked. Ethan nodded. "We need a car. Something untraceable." The man smirked. "You got cash?" Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick stack of bills. He didn't have time for negotiations. "Take what you need." The man whistled low, flipping through the money. "Looks like you're in a hurry." "You have no idea," Ethan muttered. The man nodded toward the lot. "Follow me." Ethan kept a firm hand on Olivia's back as they moved deeper into the scrapyard. The air smelled of rust and oil, and the distant sound of metal clanging echoed through the night. The man led them to a dark-colored sedan. Nothing fancy, but sturdy. "This'll get you where you need to go. No plates, no registration." "Perfect," Ethan said, handing over the cash. But before he could reach for the driver's door, a sound cut through the stillness, the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. Ethan turned sharply. Headlights appeared at the entrance of the scrapyard. His stomach dropped. The SUV was sleek, its black paint reflecting the dim light of the scrapyard. It came to a slow, deliberate stop, and the doors opened. Daniel stepped out. He was dressed in an expensive dark suit, the kind of thing that looked out of place here in the middle of nowhere. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone made the air feel heavier. Behind him, 2 men flanked his sides, security, no doubt armed. Olivia inhaled sharply beside Ethan, her fingers gripping his arm. Daniel smiled. "Little brother, you've been busy." Ethan positioned himself in front of Olivia. His heart pounded, but he kept his voice calm. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." Daniel chuckled, stepping forward. "Come on. You didn't really think you could run forever, did you?" Ethan clenched his fists. "We're leaving." Daniel tilted his head, feigning amusement. "Are you? And where exactly do you plan to go? You think you can just take her and start over?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Ethan, this isn't a negotiation. She's not leaving." Olivia stiffened. "You don't control me." Daniel's smile faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "You don't even know who you are." "I do now," she said, her voice stronger than before. Ethan felt a surge of pride. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground. Daniel exhaled, looking genuinely disappointed. "I didn't want it to come to this." He nodded toward his men. One of them reached into his jacket. Ethan moved before he even had time to think. In one swift motion, he grabbed Olivia's wrist and pulled her down behind the car, just as a gunshot rang out. The scrapyard erupted into chaos. Shouting, footsteps, the sound of metal being knocked over. The mechanic who had sold them the car cursed loudly. Scrambling for cover, Ethan reached for the gun tucked at his back, his fingers tightening around the grip. He turned, firing 2 shots toward Daniel's men. They dove behind the SUV, one of them cursing as a bullet ricocheted off metal. "Ethan!" Olivia gasped, gripping his arm. He turned to her, his breath coming fast. "We need to move." Keeping low, they darted toward the sedan. Ethan wrenched the driver's door open, pushing Olivia inside. Another shot rang out, hitting the ground inches from them. Ethan fired back blindly, forcing Daniel's men to take cover. Then he jumped into the car, twisting the keys in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Daniel stepped out from behind the SUV, his expression cold. He raised his hand. No gun, just a silent command for his men to stop shooting. Ethan gritted his teeth and hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they tore out of the scrapyard. The SUV's headlights flared behind them. And Ethan knew they wouldn't stop. Daniel wouldn't let them go that easily. Olivia was breathing hard beside him, her hands shaking. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't falling apart. She was holding on. Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it briefly before focusing back on the road. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The SUV was gaining. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Hold on!" He swerved sharply, taking the first dirt road he could find. The car jolted as it hit uneven ground, kicking up dust and gravel. Behind them, the SUV followed, its tires grinding against the rough terrain. They weren't losing them. Ethan's mind raced. He needed an edge. Up ahead, the road split. One path led to an open field. The other disappeared into dense trees. Ethan made his choice. He veered right, plunging into the forested path. Branches scraped against the sides of the car, the headlights bouncing wildly as they navigated the rough terrain. The SUV hesitated, then it followed. Olivia clutched the seat. "Ethan, I know. They needed to end this." Up ahead, the road curved sharply. An idea hit Ethan like lightning. He took a deep breath. Then, at the very last second, he yanked the wheel hard to the left, slamming the brakes at the same time. The car spun, skidding to a stop just before the edge of a ravine. Behind them, the SUV didn't have time to react. It hit the turn too fast. For a brief second, everything slowed. Then the SUV tipped forward. Too much momentum, too little control. It flipped. Olivia gasped as the vehicle tumbled. Metal crunching, glass shattering, and then silence. Ethan's hands were locked around the steering wheel, his breath ragged. Olivia turned to him, eyes wide. "Is he?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "It's over." And for the first time in 10 years, he believed it.